And, and it's lovely to see all of you here today. The best place to start is at the beginning, and I'll just give you, because a lot of people, I'll do a bit of myth busting about the stolen generation, okay? I was very fortunate to have what I had at Bomaderry. From the very beginning, from the cradle, we were expected to have the attitudes and ideas of adults. We were trained to do the work of adults from babyhood. As soon as our hands were big enough, we were being trained to do whatever household chores there had to be done. And there was only one way to be, and that was to be responsible for your thoughts and for your actions. There was absolutely no room for bad attitudes or inappropriate behaviour. It was an environment of where there's a complete lack of prejudice. The only expectation was that you be honest and you be responsible, that you respect your elders, you respect each other, respect yourselves. And so we were living in this environment where all our human needs were being met. It was the most wonderful place. It wasn't cruel. If we were naughty, if we told a fib or we didn't let the missionaries know something that we knew they should have known about, and we withheld that information, we all got smacked. But it was only one. I was with a belt, but Sister Kennedy only gave me a little, thing like that. I never got belted at Bomaderry in my life. And so this is this fantastic environment that we were living in. It was a very secure environment. We were accepted. There was a sense of belonging. There was a family atmosphere. So we lived, worked and prayed together in this beautiful environment where the adults, our carers, lived their faith and showed us by their example what we should aspire to be as human beings. Okay? So suddenly all of this comes crashing to a halt with my adoption. We were taught that adoption was referred to as going away to live. This was the greatest thing that could ever happen to any one of us, and something to be valued and it was the pinnacle of what could happen to you as one of these children is home. So the expectation was that you'd be grateful if such an opportunity came up. So I had met my prospective adoptive parents and did not like what I saw. Looking into this woman's eyes was like looking into an iceberg, and I felt extreme terror. The man, I felt like a huge hairy spider was crawling over my skin and making my skin want to crawl away. I wanted to run away from this man. So I knew there was something not right about these people, but I didn't know what. I was 5 at the time. They were checking me out as their prospective child. So I used to ignore them and pretend I didn't see them. But when it came to the crunch, I was too weak to tell Sister Kennedy. I mean, she was lovely. She bent down on bended knee, put her arm around me. "Sally, would you like to go away and live with Mr. and Mrs. Cook?" And I told a big fat lie and said, "Yes, sister." And that was the beginning of all my troubles. Because this woman didn't want me at all. She was getting me to please her husband, who was younger, 20 years younger, desperate for a child that she couldn't give him. And then she couldn't cope with the decision because she was 53 years old, had grown-up children of her own, and found she couldn't cope with it. And disliked the fact that his attention was being diverted from her to me. And so that's where all my problems started. So I went from this very Christian, beautiful environment to the other end of the scale in human values or human ideas, human thinking. This woman had colonial views towards me, even though my skin was white. She didn't like what she saw in me. That wasn't right for me to be like that, because she thought that Aboriginals were dull-witted people and no intelligence and needed a ring put through their nose and had every little thing, you couldn't do anything for themselves, and that's the way my life began for me. And it annoyed the hell out of me, What an insulting old woman, giving me a damn doll. I'd looked after a baby when I was 3. You stupid woman. This is what I'm saying in my head. How could you do this to me? You know, I learned to mix up its Farax and warm its bottle and feed it, test the temperature, feed it and burp it and put it down. But this stupid woman gave me this stupid doll. You know, I was so cranky, you know. And anyway, things just got worse from there, okay? She just didn't recognise my intelligence and wouldn't let me show it. I had to fit in with her narrow view. She'd only been to school for 3 years. She only went to school till she was 9. And so was very bigoted and very narrow in her views, and also exceedingly cruel. So those were my circumstances, and suddenly I wasn't allowed to have any friends. I came from an environment where I had 26 kids to play with. I had 2 cousins. Every one of those 26 kids was my brother or sister. We were all different skin colours, and we had 9 acres of land to play in. And we could go into the bush. Once we'd done our chores, we were allowed to be kids, we were allowed to be natural. We'd go into the bush with the bigger kids and they'd be picking berries and showing you what was edible and what was not. And there was you always had these guardians, these older children with you. And so, and suddenly I wasn't allowed to be Aboriginal. Suddenly I'd lost my identity. I couldn't be who I was in me. Suddenly I was a non-entity and had to accept this woman's. It was a figment of her imagination, but she was going to bring this thing into being and force me to fit that image she had of me, and there's nothing I could do about it. I was left-handed. I was sent to a Catholic school. I wasn't a Catholic. I couldn't become a Catholic. I was a Protestant, left-handed child of the devil, and I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And I'd never seen a nun before, and I'm thinking, what is this? What are these people? And they clink, clink, clink with their rosary beads and that. And they had all these black clothes and these things on them, and I was sort of shivering in my boots. And then I turn up at my first day at school, eating meat on Friday, and so it was, you know, my whole world had just sort of gone up in smoke. But anyway, my first big break came when I was 8. And rather than do homework, my mum and dad would take me to the Commonwealth Bank to help them with the cleaning. And I was, by that stage, absolutely frustrated and bored out of my brain because I couldn't do anything, couldn't play with anyone. So nature finds a way. And I go into the staff room after I've done my chores, and I see these magazines. How am I going here? I see these magazines, the Saturday Evening Post from Washington, Time magazine. I wanted to read, and I knew some of the words, and so that put a fire in my belly to learn how to read. And every day I went to school, and I'd listen to every word that Sister said, and then I'd remember everything, and I'd sound it out. I'd worked really hard to understand what words mean. And then in the evenings, here I am sitting up there at 9 o'clock at night or whatever, or 8:30, and then trying to remember as much as possible so I could learn to read what was in these books. I loved the Norman Rockwell paintings on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, and I wanted to know what was in those stories. And so by the time I was 9, I was a voracious reader. I was reading the Saturday Evening Post. I was reading Time magazine. It was a little bit boring compared to the Saturday Evening Post, but I was reading about Mario Lanza and his success all over the world, and Doug Hammarskjöld with the United Nations, and Patrice Lumumba over in Africa. I was reading all these things. So I was doing really well at social studies, religious studies, art, and reading. My parents used to think I was just looking at the pictures. They thought it was too dumb to read. So it took them a little while to cotton on, and suddenly, you know, oh, this is something to skite about to their friends. You know, so all their friends, neighbours, relatives, all started giving me books, and I was in seventh heaven, and it just had my head, and this was like a wormhole that I could go down in and just forget all about Mum and her weird ideas. And so I was educating myself and forgetting about my problems at the same time. So let's have another look. So the next stage in my human development, I was still being severely held back, but I was finding all these ways to get round my mother's little machinations and, you know, all these things she was doing. And the nuns actually stepped in. they could see that I was falling behind. They could see I was bright. But they didn't know my mother wasn't letting me do my homework, that I was working for help, earning my keep at working at nights instead of doing my homework and going to bed. And I was falling behind in other subjects. I was learning about the world, social studies I was really good at, and reading, and religion. I did plenty of religion. Now I really truly believed in God. I was really good at that. Knew my Bible, all this catechism. Once I went, we didn't have the Bible there when I went over the other side of the fence. So the nuns, and the senior nun, I can't remember her name, but she was a very ascetic looking woman. She had a hawk face. She was very old and wrinkly. But my mother had been brought up in the class system, and she looked up to them as her superiors. So they actually visited my mother and came down to the home and said, "Oh, Mrs. Cook, Sally's a really bright girl, but we can't understand why she's falling behind in maths and these other subjects. And but she's a promising artist, and we feel that if you send her to Saturday morning art classes, that she might relax a bit. She's a rather withdrawn child and not confident, and we feel that she'll get a bit of confidence and be more relaxed, and that might help her with her studies." And so they were more or less telling Mum that they had an inkling what was going on. They didn't know what was going on, but they were pushing her, and because they were above her and authority figures, she was always kowtowing to them and looking for approval and attention. So she didn't have any option but to send me off to art classes. So, hooray! Suddenly I'm meeting these kids. I've got the chance to get out of this terrible dark place that I'm stuck in. And of course all the kids accepted me. They were really nice. They ranged from about 10 years of age to about 15. And our teacher, Mr. Thurgood, I'd never seen an adult like him before in my life. He was very tall and lanky. He's probably in his early 60s, probably about 62. Had his hair combed straight back, it was grey. Had a tooth missing on one side. Had a sort of powerful face. He wasn't a handsome man, but he was a fine-looking man. And he had the knack of making us all feel very comfortable in his presence. And he had this wonderful way of, he spoke to us as if we were young adults. Like in that era, people were always patronising you. But he never did that to us. And so we had a 3-hour session, and he'd set aside half an hour every Saturday morning to introduce us to the art world, the great artists, their paintings, and then tell us why these paintings were so great and why these artists painted the way they did, what the reasoning was behind it, and some of their life stories. And he'd just go from genre to genre, So suddenly a whole new world opened up to me, because the only other paintings I'd seen had been religious paintings by Titian or Leonardo, things like that. I'd never been, and the same with, actually, when I was in Bombardier, I never heard a radio till I was 6. I'd never heard pop music till I was 6, or rock music as it was then. So I was extremely socially retarded anyway, So this was opening doors for me. And so quickly I was learning about Salvador Dali, the great Spanish painters, El Greco, and then the Impressionists, the Neo-Impressionists, Seurat and his pointillism. And I was looking at some of these paintings. Some of them repelled them, some of them drew me forward, and I became very interested. I quite liked. Someone gave me a book of Van Gogh's work, and I was drawn to his work. I was repelled by his self-portraits, and repelled by his early paintings when he was painting the potato eaters and that kind of thing. But I was really drawn to his paintings of the wheat fields and his room, that kind of thing. And so I was becoming sensitised to what they were communicating through the paintings. So after these talks, Mr. Thurgood would then just give us a brief idea of composition, what he expected, and then he'd let us start painting. And he'd sit down and read a book, come along maybe 20, 30 minutes later, and wander around and look at everybody's work. As soon as I saw him coming, I'd immediately start getting frantic, getting nervous, and I'd start overpainting my work, getting frantic because I was trying to show him how hard I was working, because I was really scared of adults. And so he noticed this, and he'd just sort of have a look over my shoulder and then wander off, wouldn't say anything, and I'd settle down again. So he's a really smart man. And then he'd come again, before the 2-hour session was up. And I'd see him coming, and so that the anxiety would take hold again. Away I'd go. And he'd come along and he'd say, "Oh, you've just painted over the thing I really liked. I really liked that bit, Sally." And I'd be going, "What?" And so this was his way. He would never criticise anyone. He would never make a fool of you or make you feel small in front of the class. This was his way of saying, "I don't want you to do that, Sally. I'm not. That's not what this is about." And so after a while, I started settling down and listening to what he was saying to all the other students to get an idea of what he wanted of me, and took notice of what he went ooh and ah about, and the ones that he didn't take any notice of. So at the end of the day, we all had to have a little art exhibition. We'd all have to pin our paintings up on a corkboard, and then he would be the judge. I didn't know at the time, and I probably only realised it now, that he was setting us up to be professional artists and to compete in the art world and to compete for art prizes. That was what he was actually doing. He would be exactly like, say, the judges at the Ipswich Art Awards. He'd totally ignore the paintings that had no heart. He was all about painting from the heart. So if anything was just there, they painted what they thought, or they were good technically, but there was no soul in there, he totally ignored them. And then he'd choose 2 or 3 paintings, or 4 at maximum, and they'd be highly commended paintings. And he'd say why, and how he felt about those. And then he'd pick best of show. And then he'd say why, once again. So he was stoking up the fire in the belly and saying, if you want my attention, if you want me to say these things about your paintings, this is what I want you to do, something like this. And then he'd get his journal out and he'd write the date, he'd write the subject and the artist's name, the child's name he got the best to show on that day. I kept that journal right through to the end of the year. And so I very quickly cottoned on that he really liked Impressionism, and he really liked spontaneity. So he really won my total respect, and I felt totally secure with him. And I was absolutely desperate for approval. So what did I do? Cindy, come on. Oh, Sally, that's wonderful. So more often than not, I'd win the best of show, even though he kept us all on the same level. We were all equal, even though we were varying ages. This is the way Mr. Thurgood worked. And at the end of the year, I couldn't believe it, when the technical college contacted my parents and said, "Please, Mr. and Mrs. Cook, bring your daughter along to an awards ceremony. She's won the prize as Best Artist for the year." Oh, well, I was somebody then, wasn't I? My name was in the local rag, and Mum was getting all this kudos and all this approval and all these happy noises coming from the community. She's just basking in it. Look what I've done with this ignorant child. Look what I've done and made of this child. Because it wasn't there at all, it was Mr. Thurgood, but she was just basking in it. It used to get right up my nose. Anyway, so that was my introduction. And so I went to Mr. Thurgood's lessons for the next 15 years, till I was 15, and I left school. And every year I won the Best Artist prize. And it was never varied. It was a big box, must have been 24 paints, something like a wooden presentation box of Sakura watercolours in tubes. And so they would sort of almost last me for the next 12 months. But because of all this attention, And Mum couldn't help herself. She was proud as punch, you know. And even though she had these mixed feelings about me, she'd let me paint at home. So I'd go down the wormhole all the time. It just disappeared, didn't matter. I mean, I used to drive her crazy anyway. I mean, she wanted to be like that with me. I'd annoy the hell out of her. She'd ask me to sweep the floor and I'd go... And then I got into a habit and couldn't get out of it, and Dad would say, "For God's sake, Sally, hurry up, get that." And I'd be going all through these antics, and they'd kill themselves laughing because it looks just stupid, you know. So this is my life. So anyway, fast forward, I eventually leave home. I joined the Air Force, and that was a huge growth spurt. That's when I started to grow, because I met all these lovely people, lovely well-bred girls who got me out of the shell, got me laughing, got me happy. All these men could see that I was just this lost, guileless little girl. They could see that girl in me, and I sort of brought out their feminine side, you know, and so they'd all take me under their wings. And the CEO was really funny. All the CEOs were wartime veterans, lovely men, lovely gentlemen. And Wing Commander Bevan, I'd have to take his coffee to him in the morning, and he would engage me in conversation. And by the time I walked out, he was breathless with laughter because I didn't have a clue. I was clueless. I knew nothing. And he'd just get me talking and ask me specific questions, and I'd make his day. And then all the other guys followed suit. They picked it up on the flight line. I'd have to go out on the flight line to deliver all the mail to all the dongas where they, you know, were the maintenance crew for the aircraft, the armaments, instruments, airframes, radio, you know, the whole box and dice. And they'd get me talking, and they'd fall about laughing too. If I went for a joy flight on the plane, all the pilots used to take me joyriding in the planes, the helicopters, the Goonie birds, the old DC-3s, and I'd have to go and get a flying suit of course and get permission. And as long as I'd done my work, I could go. So I'd go down to an equipment store, and the guys would see me coming and they'd start grinning, and so they'd go and find the tallest, longest flying suit they could find and say, "Here, sir." And I'd say, "Thank you." I wouldn't let on, I wouldn't raise a hair. And so I'd happily roll up my sleeves 6 times. The crotch came down to somewhere here. The backside was hanging down there. And I'd roll up the bottoms about 6 times, and I'd go over to the hangar. The pilots would take one look at me and fall about in mirth. They'd say, "Come on, Sal." You know. So this is my family, and this is where I grew up. And didn't do a lot of painting. I did actually, because they made me so happy I felt like painting again. And so I was always giving my paintings away. And, you know, even 20, 30 years later, I'd be window shopping and someone would come up and say, Sally Cook." I'd go, "Huh?" Didn't recognise her. She said, Sally, don't you remember me?" She said, "I remember you." And she said, "I still got that painting you gave me." And everybody had paintings, and every time I see someone from the Air Force, I say, "I still got that painting." I said, "I can't even remember what I painted for," you know. So it was a wonderful experience and did a lot for me, healed me a lot. And even though I couldn't catch up completely because there's huge gaps in my development because there's just nothing there. So the Air Force was wonderful and made me grow that next step. So after I served my 6 years, how are we going for time? After I served my 6 years, I took advantage of the RAF resettlement scheme, and they would pay you 2 years tuition to go and study and be equipped to find a job back in civilian life. And I had this thing in my head, I still wanted to be an artist, I still wanted to be an art teacher, so away I go. And because I didn't have any tertiary education, I had to take a portfolio along and to Bill Kerr, who was actually processing the applications, and he gave me the thumbs up and I was in. But I had no idea, by the time, you know, from the time of 10 to the time I was 25, a lot had happened, and I'd completely forgotten about poor old Mr. Thurgood and what he was on about, and I had no idea of, you know, abstract concepts. And I was out of my element because I'd gone from one environment where everything was orderly and strict and, you know, there was this hierarchy and you said, "Yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir." Everyone wore short back and sides, neat and tidy, pressed clothes, all of this. And suddenly I go to this environment and I see these teachers and they've got wild woolly hair and long hair. They're wearing tatty old t-shirts and daggy old jeans, beards, and I'm like, oh my God. And they say, hi, I'm Jeff, or I'm Jim, or whatever, or I'm Ante. And I have to call my teachers by their first name. I'm 25, okay? This is how backward I am. And so I was like a fish out of water, I tell you. And then they said, all right, today, the next 3 weeks, you're going to draw oranges. I said, what? And then after the end of it, you're going to design a box, you're going to build the box, and then you're going to create an abstract design based on these drawings that you've made. So for 3 weeks, for 3 hours a day, we had to do nothing but oranges, any way we could. I didn't understand what I was doing there, but I realise now that they're forcing me to think outside the square. So I got good marks for that, and my drawing improved markedly in that 6 weeks, or 3 weeks or whatever it was. Then we started life drawing classes. Now this was I'd never seen a naked person other than myself, and I couldn't handle it, I didn't know. I thought, oh my God, where can I look? And I couldn't focus properly because I was too embarrassed. And then these natural young girls, the uni students used to come over and try and make a bit of money. They wouldn't put a towel on or anything. They just come and stand and look over your shoulder. And some of them were quite, statuesque, shall we say. And so I'd be sort of, oh my God, I want to get out of here. And then I go home with this big sheaf of drawings on butcher's paper, and because my husband's 25 years older than me, and he was my authority figure because he was a warrant officer in the Air Force. And so I come in with these dirty drawings, and he nearly has a pink fit. He says, what's that? And I said, well, I had to do it today at school. And he said, that's disgusting. He said, what are they teaching you today? Don't think much of that. So caught between the devil and the blue sea, So anyway, I didn't like painting because I couldn't paint what I wanted to paint. Everything had to be abstract. So I was totally confused. Didn't think much of sculpture because playing with, with sculpture you carve things or you work with clay or whatever. Here I was trying to fit together fencing wire or something and didn't have a clue, couldn't handle that. I really liked screen printing and lino printing, loved that. Had a great teacher. They were all nice teachers, all our teachers were nice. And then there was creative drawing. Now that was a major stumbling block for us all. And because I was so ignorant, I used to look up to everybody else. Didn't matter that they were younger than me. I knew they knew more about life than I did. So I was just this lost little girl, and I was like a chameleon. If they said this, I took them literally, and I'd just change. I'd change colour, and that's what I'd be. But I still stayed little me inside, I was still just little 6-year-old Sally, and just thought, oh, well, if that's what they wanted me to do, I'll be that, because I'm the subconscious now, I'm the non-entity and I don't exist. But I'm the one that runs the show, So talk about confusion. And anyway, so we roll up to the creative drawing classes, and our teacher was Elizabeth Musprat. And so all the other students, they were as confused as I was, and they say, she's nuts, this lady is really, really weird. So I thought, oh, okay, Elizabeth's weird. And then when I went to the classes, I thought, she must be weird. What's she talking about? No one knew what she wanted. And anyway, because we didn't respect the poor woman, she was a lovely lady, absolutely lovely. And so we didn't apply ourselves, and we were all sort of falling behind with our creative drawing skills. And then, anyway, it was getting near assessment time, for doing assignments for assessments in the first semester. And Elizabeth sort of stands up in front of the class and says, all right, I want you to draw your life. Maybe we went, what? What? And I'm inside my head going, what? What do you mean, draw my life? How the hell can I draw my life, silly woman? How can I? Didn't know what to do. So I was in a tiz all day about this. So I go home, play happy homemaker and cook tea for my husband, listen do whatever he was talking about at work. Then I go, give myself time to think, and then I had to go and do my homework. I had to get it done the next day, otherwise I was going to fail. So, I thought, God, I'll just string her along, I'll just tell her this story, and I'll just take the rinse out of it, So, having relaxed myself like that, I immediately set to work. I created a wash on the paper, and I got a graphite pencil, and I just let myself go. And suddenly, I turned out this landscape, and the landscape was completely made of stones. There's not a blade of grass, not one tree, nothing there. All there was a river with some wavy lines in it, but there are all kinds of stones, from the tiniest little pebbles to bigger pebbles to rocks to bigger rocks to boulders, bigger boulders, and then this box canyon with these sheer walls, and then in the far distance was this great mountain, a big solid block of stone rock with a huge sheer cliff in the front of it. And I thought, that looks pretty good. I reckon I might get some marks with this, because they're always saying, don't draw landscapes, don't do that. But I thought I might have a chance with this. And and there was this massive boulder, it was sort of like an egg-shaped boulder, and I had put 3 figures there. And they were all hunched over, but they'd turned to stone, and they had their heads down. Now, I didn't know what I'd drawn. I didn't understand abstract concepts. That's what I'd drawn. I roll up to class next day, and Elizabeth's checking out everyone's work, and then she comes to me and she said, "Oh, this looks interesting, Sally." She said, "Tell me about it. What does it mean?" And I said, so I launched off with this load of bull I'd worked out in my head, And so I said, all right, this area in the foreground, these tiny little pebbles, they represent the minor irritations of my life. I really started to put my heart into it, I really started. And I said, these bigger little pebbles and these bigger stones, they're things that get up my nose and I can't do anything about. And then, this area of larger stones and small boulders, they're problems that I don't know what to do about. I can't do anything. I don't know how to do that. And these people over here, they're the people in my life that I go to asking for help and wanting advice, and they turn their back. They've turned to stone. They've turned their backs on me, and they put their heads down, and they don't want to know. And I said, this big, huge boulder here, that represents social attitudes and social conditioning. They cling to that. They're facing into that and don't want to know about me and my problems. And then I really, laid it on thick. And then I said, this river here, this is my river of life. And these wavy lines in it, these represent the moments of calm in my life. And then this mountain, this huge mountain up the back, that's the mountain I've got to climb in my life, and to get over the other side and to be able to be who I really am. Well, she said, oh, Sally, that's wonderful, wonderful. She waxed lyrical, and I'm going, huh? Didn't have a clue. I had actually done what she'd told me to do. That was my life. But I didn't have a clue. It didn't register, doink, doink, bang, bang, nothing. And so the joke was on me. I didn't know. And this sort of reminds me of another incident when I was about 17. And I was working I'd been the best student at business college, so I got the best job in town, which was a junior secretary for a firm of solicitors. And the first Christmas it was the second Christmas, just before Christmas, my mother I was getting £10 a week, which is a massive amount of money for a young 17-year-old. And but my mother used to take £7 and leave me with £3, so I never learnt to use my money because she thought I was too stupid, and I never learnt any life skills. And so I wanted to buy some presents for friends that I'd made, and so I sat down and painted all these Christmas cards, and I did quite a few. And I was always loved the English Christmas scenes and the Santa Claus, all these beautiful English scenes, and I'd captured it perfectly. There was a real feeling about these cards. And I thought, I might be able to sell them and make some money for Christmas. And I was only putting, two and sixpence or something like that on them. I took them all to work, and because I go to the senior girls, because they're like my big sisters, you know. And Helen, the senior girl in charge of me, said, "Oh, Sally!" And she called all the other girls over, and they're all oohing and ahhing. And then Helen rushes into our boss, Mr. Elvey. Mr. Elvey, come and see Sally's paintings. Oh, they're beautiful. And one of the other secretaries runs into Mr. Walton's office, and he's a big Scottish man. He's lovely. And so he lumbers out, and he was sort of, you know, you can see there's light in his eyes, and his lips were slightly parted, and I could see he was just really taken, you know. You could see that everyone was really genuine. And then Mr. Walton went rushing down the hallway to get the senior partner, Mr. Morton. Mr. Morton, come and see Sally's painting. And they all raved, and I was sort of, what? I didn't, because I was taught not to value what I had. That was the way I was being brought up, that what I did wasn't of any value. And so I couldn't understand why they were and how these paintings of mine affected them so deeply, so emotionally. So all I was doing is expressing my love of nature, and it's no different now, you know. So how am I going for time, you know? And the funny thing was, I'm sure that they all had an inkling of what was going on at home. They couldn't help but notice. And after, you know, I was turned 18 in January, and of course I was still firmly tied to my mother's apron strings. And after I turned 18, Mr. Morton came to me and said, "Sally," he said, "I'm really impressed with your painting ability. I want to send you to East Sydney Technical College, where you can study to be a professional artist full-time for 4 years, and I will pay all your fees." Well, I was so stunned, I could hardly say thank you, you know, and I was terribly excited. And of course, with my mother, I had to sort of hide everything. I'd hold everything in so I wouldn't give her a chance to sort of put the knife in, you know. But I said to him, you know, I have to ask my parents. I didn't understand. I did not know that I had the right to leave home. I did not know I had any human rights at all. And so I was almost skipped home, and I was so happy. And it came as soon as I told my mother, as soon as I started telling her, I knew that this was not going to happen. And this fleeting moment of happiness, she just sort of calmly stepped on it and squashed it as if it was a bug. And she said, "You go back to Mr. Morton and you say that you can't go." She said, "You can't do that. You're not old enough to do that. You can't look after yourself. You go back and tell him no." And so I was so ashamed. It hurt me more to have to throw it back in his face. I couldn't believe the gall of the woman to actually let him see what she really was underneath. That was what she'd actually done. But I was used to her doing these things to me. So I'd just switch off. You know, it didn't matter. You can just, it doesn't matter. You don't give them any, I'd never ever let on to her. And but I decided in my own mind, I said, okay, in my head, this is the way you want to treat me. No more reflected glory for you. And I just stopped painting. Boink. Stop. Point blank. She couldn't make me. That was my way of dealing with the situation. And I didn't start painting again until I was in the Air Force, and all these wonderful people I met in the Air Force made me so happy that I started painting again. So my life has been one of extremes. And so this is what shaped me into the person I am today. My pleasure. And thanks for your interest, and thanks very much for listening to me. Sometimes I waffle, but Richard, you know, but anyway, I'm very happy to be here. It's lovely to see you all here, and thanks very much. Okay. Afternoon tea smells good.